Hello, my name is TinaRath. I'm going to read a short story from my collection of short stories, which is called A Chimera in My Wardrobe. It's available from Amazon. The narrator of the stories has a chimera living in her wardrobe for the summer, and he's volunteered to pay rent by telling stories. This one is told on a very hot night, and it's intended to chill the blood. But the chimera has promised to stop if it gets too scary. The very rich old man caused a great deal of trouble at the hotel even before he arrived. From the early morning, the hotel manager had been fussing about, seeing that his suite was arranged in accordance with his very specific instructions, and all the staff who had been chosen to wait upon him were ready for the minutest inspection. And then, of course, the very rich old man was late. So late that the manager could have let his suite 3 times over while they waited for him. So, long after the young assistant hall porter should have gone off duty, he was kept hanging about in the lobby, waiting for the very rich old man. He complained, though quietly, that he might as well have stayed in his home village and joined the army, like all the other young men. He added less quietly that he had after all run away from home to avoid this kind of parade, and he was sure that the emperor himself didn't keep his troops waiting about like this. No one paid any attention to him except the old head porter, who promised him a taste of military discipline that he would not forget in a hurry as soon as their important guest was settled in. And the young assistant hall porter said that he was probably not coming anyway. He had probably dropped dead on the road from old age, upon which the great double doors of the hotel were thrown open, and the very rich old man came in. And the young assistant hall porter was forced to admit, though only to himself, that the guest would have been very impressive, even if he had been a very poor old man. He had the kind of face, the young man thought, that you saw on old coins. His profile was clean and clear-cut, and he had marvellous silvery hair brushed back from his forehead, a high hawk nose and piercing black eyes. And the young man found himself hoping that his uniform was in a fit state to stand inspection from those dark eyes. As the man moved down the line of bowing and curtsying hotel staff, it was not until he was safely past that the young man realized that he had not come alone. Walking behind him was a small figure muffled in a fur cloak, and he supposed at first that she must be the old wife of the very rich old man, because all he could see of her was a glimpse of white hair peeping over the high collar of her cloak. But then the housekeeper bustled forward to take it off her shoulders, and there was a transformation. The hair that was piled so elaborately was white as spun sugar, but it was the hair of a very young, blonde girl. She was so tiny and delicate that she might have been a decoration on one of the elaborate cakes which the hotel was so famous. She was dressed in a full-skirted gown of yellow silk that was sashed very tightly around her tiny waist and fitted very closely about the bodice, and it whispered as she walked across the polished parquet, and the young man thought it looked very much more like a ball gown than the kind of dress that ladies usually wore for travelling. The neck was so low that he could see the tops of her creamy breasts, and round her soft white throat she had tied a broad ribbon of gold-coloured velvet. Now, the young assistant hall porter was a very respectable man indeed, and never went to visit the young ladies in Paradise Alley, even on the Emperor's birthday, and such an indulgence was almost a patriotic duty. But as this lady drifted past him, he had a sudden wish to lean forward and tug the end of that ribbon with his teeth and watch it unroll across her bosom, and just as he formulated this shocking idea, the young lady turned to look at him, and he saw that her eyes were as blue as an angel's, and he found himself blushing hotly with pure shame. And then, to make matters worse, the young lady hurried forward and put her little white hand on the arm of the very rich old man, and murmured something that made him glance round at the young assistant hall porter with no very pleasant expression, though no doubt it was the expensive gas lights of the lobby which gave his eyes such a reddish gleam. But the hotel manager had come forward to escort his guests up the wide stairway, and he was not going to be delayed by anything so insignificant as an assistant hall porter, so the couple vanished round the golden curve of the banisters, and the hotel staff who remained in the lobby relaxed a little. "Is that beautiful young lady the old man's daughter or his granddaughter?" asked the assistant hall porter innocently. "Neither the one nor the other," said the old head porter. "She's his wife. That's the kind of wife you get when you're as rich as he is, my boy." And one of the waiters joked that they had better have a doctor on hand, because a night with a gorgeous piece like that would probably finish such an old man off completely, and the assistant hall porter, who up till then, apart from the occasional mutter about discipline, had been very quiet and well behaved, hit the waiter on the nose. A moment later they were fighting all over the lobby, to the serious detriment of some long lace curtains and the potted plants. They were very quickly pulled apart, and there was a general feeling that the fight was rather a welcome release from the day's tension. Indeed, both combatants went off together arm in arm, and spent the rest of the night drinking beer in a student tavern. So the assistant hall porter returned for his next period of duty, feeling more than a little fragile. The old hall porter looked at him sourly and told him that the wife of the very rich old man had made a number of purchases that day, which had been delivered to the hotel and now had to be taken up to their suite. "So that's your job, my boy," he said. "Take that lot upstairs and watch yourself. By the way, that stuff's been lying about down here all afternoon. The gracious lady waited for you to come up on duty before she asked for it to be brought upstairs." The very young hall porter devoted himself to the task of carrying the gracious lady's parcels and packages up the service stairs until they were all assembled outside the door of the very rich old man's suite. When he was making his last trip, he came across one of the chambermaids on the landing, her apron thrown over her head, sobbing violently, and when he asked her what was wrong, she only pushed past him and ran down the stairs. Therefore, it was with considerable misgivings that he prepared to knock on the door. Had the young lady somehow read his thoughts? Had she just seen him looking at her? Should he perhaps run away and join the army after all? But even as he hesitated, an imperious voice from within said, "Enter," and he opened the door and began to carry in the parcels. The suite was very brightly lit by the hotel's famous gas lights, but the windows were tightly curtained, and the young man stood still in horror, because the beautiful young lady was sitting curled up in an armchair, and she was wearing what could only be a dressing gown. It was made of dull crimson velvet, and the top half was like a military jacket, with black frogging and a high stiff collar, so he couldn't see any of her flesh at all, but he knew it was there. And her pale hair was loose, long curls streaming over her shoulders, right down almost to the hem of her dressing gown, and for a moment all he could think of was what his grandmother would have said about a young lady who would sit with her hair down, and no doubt her stays off, while a strange young man came into the room and the sweat broke out on his forehead. The young lady waved her hand, indicating that he should bring the packages in. So he brought them, being very careful not to look at the young lady, and piled them up, and she raised her hand with a rainbow flash of rings to half conceal a wide pink yawn. And the very rich old man turned almost apologetically to the young assistant hall porter and told him to open the parcels, and the young man, his ears burning, unknotted string and unwrapped paper and opened boxes, and the beautiful young lady snatched out dresses of lace and silk and satin and velvet, in colours of scarlet and rose and dark purple and black, and matching velvet cloaks from the bigger boxes, and bracelets and necklaces of brilliant stones from the smaller packages, and held them against her while she flounced about the room, admiring them and calling upon the very rich old man to tell her how well they became her. But she never looked in the mirror, and the young assistant hall porter realised that this was because there were no mirrors there. All the mirrors had been taken away, even the one over the mantelpiece, which had been fastened to the wall. He could see the big rectangle of lighter paper and the holes at each corner. And he gathered up the string and the wrapping paper and the boxes as quickly as he could, and bowed to the very rich old man and the beautiful young lady, and hurried out of the room. He went back to the lobby, where the old head porter took one look at his face, and hurried him into a back room, where he gave him a glass of plum brandy. But when the young man tried to tell him what had frightened him so badly, he would not listen. After a while they went back to the lobby, and the young man thought he would try to slip out of the hotel and lose himself in the streets, but every time he tried, the old head porter was between him and the door. No guests came in to distract them, but they spent the whole evening playing a wretched game of grandmother's footsteps. And the old head porter was much too sharp to be caught out, so the young man was still in the lobby when the golden clock that hung above the great desk struck 12. And at that moment the very rich old man came down the stairs with the beautiful young lady on his arm. She was wearing one of her new dresses, a ball gown with great sweeping skirts and a close-fitting bodice of black lace. Her hair was dressed with ivory combs set with diamonds. Chains of diamonds spiralled up her bare arms, almost to the shoulders, and there was a broad collar of diamonds around her throat. The very rich old man led her into the ballroom, and the hall porter followed them, and the head porter did not try to hold him back. The ballroom had been decorated with great swaths of red and black silk, which cascaded over the mirrors that lined the walls, and all the vases were filled with red lilies, and the room was lit by 3 blazing gasoliers. It was all ready for the ball, but there were no dancers and there was no orchestra. As soon as the very rich old man led his wife into the middle of the empty floor, a waltz began to play out of the air, and it was music that made the hairs stand up on the back of the young man's neck. The beautiful young lady swept a magnificent curtsy, and the very rich old man bowed almost to the ground, and then they began to dance. And as they danced, the young man noticed a very strange thing. The beautiful young lady's diamonds began to take on a faint colour, a delicate cloudy pink at first, like a glass of water with a tiny drop of red wine in it. Then they grew red, then blazing scarlet, so that when at last the waltz came to an end, she was wound and crowned with rubies. And when the music stopped, the very rich old man dropped down white and bloodless in the middle of the ballroom floor. And she laughed aloud and held out her redly glistening arms to the young assistant hall porter and shrieked aloud, "Dance with me now, young man, for I need a fresh partner." And he ran out of the ballroom and through the lobby of the hotel and through the city streets until he came to the barracks, where he enlisted for active service in the army and never came back to the city. There was a small silence, and then the Chimera asked hopefully, "Was that chilling?" "Oh, it was. There are goose pimples on my arms." "What happened to the young man?" "He made a success of his army career and went back to his village at last for a long and happy retirement. But for the rest of his long life, he wondered what would have happened if he had danced with a beautiful young lady." There was another pause. "What would have happened?" I asked. The Chimera shook its head. "Much too scared," it said. And no doubt it was wrong.